next on the agenda, we are going to be talking a little bit about the history of this conference, and especially thanking many of the people who have made this conference and its previous incarnations possible. So actually, as several of the speakers during the conference have mentioned, Paul Davidson included, this conference was a continuation of the conference in Knoxville. We moved it to UMKC, I believe, when Paul left the University of Tennessee. And that conference at Tennessee, in many people's minds, was a continuation of the Trieste Summer School, which took place for 10 years in Trieste, Italy. That conference at Trieste, and there are a number of excellent volumes that are proceedings from papers at the Trieste Summer School. I think there's one that was co-edited by Bertram Sheffield and Krishna Bharadwaj, was it? No? Okay, well, in any case, there's, see me after, I'll tell you. In any case, the Trieste Summer School was co-organized by Jan Kregel, Sergio Paranello, and Pierangelo Garignani. So we thank them for their vision and hard work, I'm sure, in organizing 10 summer schools, especially, so we hear, the acrimony of debate and so on. To keep that going was probably not an easy task. And then the conference moved to the University of Tennessee, and there Paul and Louise Davidson obviously were the people who were organizing the conference, running the conference, and keeping it going for so many years. Then, once we moved to UMKC, and now I'm going to start to recognize some individuals who are with us, and so you should feel free to stand when I call your name. Early on, when was the first one here? Because we first came, we still went down to Tennessee. Yeah, I think the last one in Tennessee might have been 01. 2002 was the first one here. Okay, so back then we had Pavlina Chernova, Kelly Pinkham, who is with us. Is Dorothy Hawkins here? Dorothy Hawkins. She was around earlier, and she was at some of the sessions. And then Charlene Heinen. Thank you, Charlene. Heather Starzinski, I don't believe, is here, but she did a lot of work over the years for our conference. And then we have some people who provided financial support for the conferences. Warren Mosler. The Ford Foundation. Emmy Sharp. and the Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics. They bought all of the wine for this conference. That tells us something. Okay. And then perhaps not providing financial support, but moral support, I'm not sure. The Levy Institute. And UMKC's Bernardin Haskell Foundation, the Bernardin Haskell Lectures. Also, the graduate school at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Okay, now, for the current conference, there are some people who have just done such outstanding work that we really need to them. There's Mila. Avi. Nicola. Matthew. I don't know if Katie Taylor is here, but she did a lot of work. Also, Deborah Foster from the department office. And then students who made middle of the night, middle of the morning airport runs because of all of the crazy cancellations and reschedulings of flights and so on. Felipe Messina. And Usha Prasad. And also for her driving contributions related to Fred Lee's attendance, Julie Posnick. Okay, now I want to ask all of the students who volunteered for the conference to please stand. Also, Fred Lee has been a long-time supporter of the conference, obviously participant, but in previous years, he kind of kept everyone moving and keeping everybody organized and moving from one event to the next and, you know, yelling and screaming at people and everything. So, Fred Lee. Please contribute to the scholarship in his name. We really want to, you know, make that a reality. Also, New Economic Perspectives was a big supporter of the conference. That's our blog. And then the people. Stan? Yes, Professor Kelton, please stand. Okay. And also Terrence, the streamer. And Jim works with Terrence, so we don't want to forget him. And let's see here. Randy Ray also contributed to this conference in many ways over the years. Okay. And Landon Rowland was a big contributor, financial supporter. He could not be with us as Professor Cadelski, knows. He's a good friend of Professor Cadelski and attended the last time, but for health reasons he was not able to attend this time. So let's see. Let's see here. We have Jan Kregel. Have we thanked Jan Kregel? Okay. Oh, okay. Now I remember. All of the alumni of our department who volunteered at previous conferences, would you please stand? Fidel, Z, Tahi, Natalia, Yen, Eric, Pavlina, Joel, right, Chakatala. Yeah, seriously, not to be forgotten. Okay. Now, next on the order of business is a brief announcement of our new institute. If the students involved in the institute could please come forward. We've got Akdas and Natalie who are going to be unfurling the banner. We did do this at one of the sessions yesterday, but because there was another session at the same time, we just wanted to let everybody know. And so all the students who are involved in the Institute, it's the Binzager Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, and Father Kaboo, our own alumni, Father Kaboo, is going to be president.
Thank you. Matt is going to be the research director for the Institute, and a number of graduate students here at UMKC will be involved, and the Institute will support stipends and tuition for graduate students here at UMKC and research assistants at Denison University. We'll be eventually holding our first conference, probably at Denison, maybe a year from now. We'll be publishing traditional working papers, policy notes. We'll try to be very policy oriented. I think that's the mission that we agreed on. So some of you have seen some video crew here filming some footage from the conference. So the idea is to turn some of the policy notes into short videos that will be distributed via Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. So yes, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and especially YouTube, because you'll be seeing some of that footage there. We'll be looking forward to receiving your submissions, working papers, ideas, contributions. The website is up and running, so please read about it. The main focus is sustainable prosperity. The job guarantee will be at the center of that research agenda, but we're broadening our focus beyond just jobs and beyond just the economy and the bottom line that most people focus on. So we're looking at the triple bottom line. People, planet, prosperity is the focus of the Institute. So thank you.
And there are a number of other students who are also involved who were not able to be here tonight, some who were at the session yesterday. Okay, great. So now we are going to move to the keynote speech for this evening, and just like to say that we are very pleased to have our Chancellor with us this evening, Leo Morton, and you know, so many people have remarked who graduated and haven't been here in a while at how much the campus has changed in just the few years that you've been our chancellor, started as interim chancellor and then as our chancellor, and the building that our conference is in, and some of us were in the annex to the library, the new, high-tech, multimedia, beautiful facilities. And so we thank you for your leadership, and we thank you for joining us tonight. And so please welcome Chancellor Leo Morton, who will introduce Robert Cadelski.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you again. I was here a couple of years ago when Lord Cadelski was here and had a chance to enjoy him then. And thank you for all of the compliments. I can assure you I have not laid one brick. A lot of people have done that, and I've just been here to help facilitate it, but it's just been great and for a great cause. And I have to tell you, I get to go to a lot of events, and I have to tell you the news that I've picked up here tonight is just absolutely outstanding. I've heard about the fact that you've had a great conference, you've gotten some great national coverage, new institute, a new journal, and the like. This is what it's all about, and it happens because we've just got great people here. Well, I am here to because we have the pleasure of having Lord Robert Cadelski with us again to address us, and I understand he will be talking about, in today's economy, what do we tell our students? Good question. You're in for it. I understand you already heard him today, but he was over there just a little while ago still writing. So I know he has gotten some new revelations that he's going to pass on to you today. Now, I have the difficult task of introducing to you, because you're post-Keynesians here, someone who needs no introduction. Everyone here knows who Lord Cadelski is. In fact, if you look up on Wikipedia what a post-Keynesian is, it starts to talk about Lord Cadelski, all right? And everybody knows that is the authority in this world today, all right? Well, I think you know his life story. It's pretty dramatic. As a matter of fact, he's not a typical professor. And of course, he was born to British parents in Manchuria. And it's a coal mine from the Chinese government. Now, in 1941, when the war was declared between Britain and Japan, the Cadelskis were interned. And first in Manchuria and later in Japan. And in a swap of interns, it was arranged between Britain and Japan, the Cadelskis were freed. So Lord Cadelski studied at Oxford, followed by a fellowship at the British Academy, and wrote a number of books on politics, economics, and British history. Now, after teaching for a time at Johns Hopkins, he joined the faculty at the University of Warwick, where he continues to teach, write, and engage in British politics. Must be exciting, right? So, Lord Cadelski is the author of a three-volume biography of John Maynard Keynes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Lord Cadelski.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. I'm so sorry to be inflicting myself on you for the second time today, or rather being inflicted on you for the second time today, because Randall says he hadn't realized that dinner follows lunch in a regular... I first, of course, may I endorse the good wishes that everyone has already expressed to the Journal for Post-Keynesian Economics under its new editorial direction. The world needs it, and I'm sure it's going to be even more successful than it has been in the past. Secondly, let me say how much I enjoyed the present conference. I enjoyed the sessions. Post-Keynesian events are always an intellectual feast, and long may they continue. I don't want to say anything in any way to curb anyone's enthusiasm and commitment to taking part. I just have one little observation, and that was it was disconcerting at some of the sessions to be plunged raw into an equational system without any prior explanation of what the presenter was trying to do, why he thought it was worth doing, what he thought he or she was achieving. To my mind, the ideal presentation starts with the presenter's intuitions, and this, and not any maths or equational system, is what connects the presenter to the listener, or at least to this listener. And I think this is a good intellectual style, and I think it's the key to effective persuasiveness. You've got to connect to the intuitions. Your intuitions have got to connect to the intuitions of those who are receiving them for any persuasion to be effective. And goodness knows we need to be in the business of persuading, because a lot of people aren't listening to what we have to say. Well, that's by way of introduction to my topic, which is what's wrong with economics, really. What ought we to be teaching our economics students? Now, the present discontent with the way economics is done precedes the crash of 2008, 2009. Immediately preceding it, I quote, "Economics today is under more pressure than at any time since the 1930s." And that's what someone said in 2003. And the charge against it was that, as taught in universities, it neither explained contemporary economic reality nor provided a framework for critical debate on economic issues in democratic societies. Abstraction, mathematicization, prescription were the main enemies. A student movement for the reform of economics teaching started in France in May 2000 and spread to Spain, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The issues raised by the students focused mainly on the irrelevance of undergraduate and graduate economics teaching for understanding real economic problems, and the students were against, I quote, imaginary economic worlds being imposed on students. They called this autism, and called themselves the post-autistic movement. And what the students singled out was the refusal of economics to take seriously any approach to economics not based on neoclassical theory, and against its dogmatic teaching style that aims to indoctrinate rather than educate. Well, that spread, but it didn't spread that far. But the crash of 2008, 2009 gave it a great deal more impetus, and it produced a widely supported demand for rethinking economics, with an Institute for New Economic Thinking set up in 2009, funded by George Soros. It's called INET for short, and a student movement for post-crash economics. And that, you find branches of that all around Europe, and I dare say in the United States too, though I don't know as much about the United States student movement. And what the students were calling for was what they called a heterodox or pluralist approach to the teaching of economics, with less maths and more attention to history, the history of economic thought, and methodological questions. So there's a sort of ferment going on. Now, I think it's difficult to say what a post-autistic economics would look like. Economists themselves are at war. Consider the following clashing schools. Chicago economics, let's start with that. That seems to me the economics in charge. Agents have rational expectations. They efficiently utilize all available relevant information. There is perfect information, perfect competition, and complete markets. And the first, perfect information, means they either know what is going to happen for certain or have mathematical probabilities about future events. Applied to financial markets, risks are always correctly priced. I mean, these are the models which students get, and for them constitutes the core of economics. Money in these sort of models has no utility. Well, that's, this is very shorthand, but that's the school in office, so to speak, the government in power. Then there are the new Keynesians. Agents have rational expectations but imperfect information. Markets can therefore fail, and there is scope for government intervention to correct these failures and rescue economics from savage downturns. Now, these two schools may be thought of as the mainstream. They can be called freshwater and saltwater, deriving from the location of the first Chicago and the second Harvard. And they've sort of split the spoils of intellectual debate between them. But they are challenged by what someone at this conference has called the backwater economists. And pride of place to the backwater economists goes to the post-Keynesians, Keynes himself believed that humans behave rationally, or at least reasonably, but that the future is not just risky, but uncertain. Uncertainty can't be removed by better information because no one knows what the future will bring, and can't know because we create the future ourselves. Now, this makes investment very volatile. Because of uncertainty, money has utility as a store of value. Agents' attitude to liquidity is the single most important explanatory variable for market economics. Now, I think there are, of course, as in all economics, there's not just one school of post-Keynesians, but a number of schools of post-Keynesians. But I'm repeating the official doctrine as it is known at post-Keynesian conferences of this kind. So that, I think, is the chief backwater school. But it's not the only one. It's not the only one. They're the Hayekians. Hayek denied the validity of macroeconomics itself. The state cannot aggregate the dispersed information given by prices in a market economy. Unlike the first two schools, Hayekians deny the existence of equilibrium, since the price system is a discovery mechanism. But they agree with the Chicago school in deploring all forms of government intervention in the free working of markets. A particular bugbear of theirs is fractional reserve banking, to which they attribute the excessive credit creation which led to the banking collapse of 2008-2009. So on the whole, they favor free banking. Now, Hayek got a Nobel Prize for economics in the early 90s. I can't remember the exact date. Maybe it was in the late 80s. And he's a very important figure in 20th century economics, but he hasn't had very much influence on the mainstream of the economics profession. His influence was in eclipse after the Second World War, and then came to, in the 1980s, when he became a kind of iconic figure. And when he was asked what you need to defeat your intellectual enemies, he said rather wittily, you just have to live longer. And he lived longer than Keynes, and so there was never a final round between him and Keynes after the publication of The Road to Serfdom, Hayek's classic, in 1944. Then there's a fifth school, behavioral economics. This sets out promisingly to theorize on the basis of how human beings actually behave. It uses cognitive psychology to reach the momentous conclusion that human brains are programmed to act in ways which do not conform to rationality as understood by economists. Well, that is a great finding. It's very important. It's very good that they've actually taken on board some of things that cognitive psychologists and sociologists and others have known for hundreds of years. But I think they are important at this moment. Some new Keynesians have taken up behavioral economics in theoretical despair with conventional models. But behavioral economics fails to break with methodological individualism. In place of institutions, it substitutes neural networks. And so I think that's a great failing, and that's why I think it's not going to get anywhere in the end. Certainly not going to challenge the mainstream. Then you have institutional economics. I have a lot of sympathy with them. I think they're great. Economic behavior takes place within a certain set of rules or institutions. Institutions define whose interests as buyers and sellers are taken into account and how. By altering the institutional setting, the performance of the economic system can be modified, and institutional economists regard institutional interdependence as the origin of transaction costs. Now, then you have a seventh school. They're business cycle theories. They're real business cycle theories. They're monetary business cycle theories, all designed to deal with the gap between equilibrium and reality. And they've been going for well, hundreds of years as well. Finally, you have Marxist economics. Marxists say that economics is part of the ideological superstructure of capitalism. Its purposes and techniques are to justify or disguise the capitalist exploitation of the worker. And Marxist economics comes closest, I think, to institutional economics. Now, all these are schools, but there are only two that actually count in the most prestigious universities of the world. And of the two, the Chicago economics is by far the strongest and has had the far the greatest academic influence in recent events, not only within the profession, but on policy. Now, let's now consider what might happen. I mean, how can the dominance of this school be challenged? The student demand for pluralism recognizes the fact that recent events are far from having introduced what Thomas Kuhn called a new paradigm, or a paradigm shift. You know Kuhn's argument, of course. Once the basic ideas of science are settled, its adherents apply themselves to the solution of a multitude of puzzles within the framework of the basic ideas, which Kuhn calls a paradigm. This paradigm must be accepted by those who wish to be accepted as professionally competent. Normal science settles down to a routine solution of the puzzles shown up by the paradigm to exist, until some startling event, some crisis, forces a paradigm shift. Existence of paradigms do not exclude sub-paradigms, just as religions produce different sects. The new Keynesians have established a niche as a sub-paradigm of the main paradigm. The doctrine in office, which is the Chicago school, is looking increasingly frayed at the edges, but faute de mieux, it continues. Those who want to shift the paradigm have to face the uncomfortable fact that there hasn't been a paradigm shift in economics since at least the 17th century. Marginalism was not a paradigm shift, and the Keynesian revolution was an aborted paradigm shift. Why that happened, why the Keynesian revolution was aborted in terms of the history of economics, is a huge subject. in the history of both thought and politics. Some of the blame must be placed on Keynes himself. He did his revolution no service, I think, by relying on the same deductive methods as his predecessors, that is, neglecting the problem of empirical verification of his hypothesis, accepting some of the leading marginist propositions, and particularly that factors are paid their marginal products, and failing to break with the equilibrium method. It was thus easy for people in adopting those bits that sort of could be fitted most easily into the classical economics of the day to omit chapter 12 of the General Theory and the Quarterly Journal of Economics article of February 1937 from the Keynesian message that was transmitted both in the universities and into politics. In the opinion of a very, very subtle and intelligent interpreter of economic ideas, Guy Routh, Keynes provided, I quote, a conversion kit whereby existing theory could assimilate the phenomena of mass unemployment and to discover a formula in terms of this theory to ensure the preservation of a reduced inequality of income and wealth. Now, so where do we go from this point? Now, I think, first of all, I'm not sure that Kuhn's notion of paradigm and paradigm shift, they're very seductive, but I'm not sure that they're really applicable in economics. Remember, his book was called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and it does raise the question then of whether or to what extent economics is a science, and if so, what kind of science it is. It may be that the model of a single paradigm, which is periodically replaced in the march of progress, suits physics or chemistry, but doesn't actually suit economics. It may be there is never and never deserves to be a single paradigm, and the establishment of a single paradigm is a usurpation which ought to be resisted. I tend to sympathize with that view. What one finds in the history of economic thought is that the technical apparatus gets more refined and more sophisticated, but the topics which are the subject of the apparatus, they continue. Debate about them continues interminably and has been going on forever and ever without real resolution. And that is not true in the history of natural science. I'm writing a book at the moment called Unsettled Questions in Macroeconomic Policy. And I find that the unsettled questions, have been unsettled for 300 years. I mean, you're talking monetary theory and monetary policy, fiscal theory, fiscal policy, exchange rate policy, banking policy, distribution. All these questions have been interminably discussed. You find the quantity theory of money in 1650. You actually find it in 3000 BC too. And it's been refined, it's been put into equational form, the equations have lengthened, but the basic ideas have always been there and they've always been disputed. And there's a great dispute going on now about the origins of money. A dispute incidentally stimulated quite a lot by quantitative easing. So what do you gather from this? Economic theories are highly contextual. Maybe their origins are intellectual and arise from genuine intellectual problems, in the logical problems, perhaps in the working out of a theory. But the stories which get accepted out of these intellectual efforts, the stories which get accepted are those which reflect the power structure of the day. You start with a whole lot of possibilities for development, and then some of them are taken up. And the ones that are taken up really depend not so much on their intellectual coherence, but on the fact that they are acceptable to the people who run society. And I think Schumpeter referred to this when he talked about the sociology of success. And he was referring to the sociology of success in economics. We don't study the sociology of success. It's part of the history of ideas, but it's a very, very important part. In the last 100 years, I think one can discern two periods of turbulence out of which new pseudo-paradigms emerged. And the first was in the period between the wars, 1920 to 1940, when, of course, there was a global problem of mass unemployment. And the Keynesian revolution was the victor in that turmoil. It established itself as the new. You have another period of turmoil in the 1970s, out of which you got the victory of monetarism and new classical economics. Are we on the brink of a third grand discussion? I'd hope so. We should be. But I wonder whether the recent slump was really serious enough to provoke a third grand discussion. We've become very, very good at protecting ourselves against the worst effects of slumps of this kind, as one of the very good papers I heard this afternoon pointed out. We can sort of cut them off. And by cutting them off, we also cut off the discussion to which they should lead. Now, it's not worth having a really big slump in order to get another grand discussion going in economics. Just as, you know, we understand that wars are a great engine of progress, but we don't willingly wish a war on people in order to get progress. And I think so the sad fact is that there may not have been enough turbulence in recent years to stimulate the kind of discussion that could lead to a shifting of economics from its foundations. As Bob Dimon said to me today, he said economics has emerged embarrassed, but not really shaken from the events of 2008, 2009. Well, so I only leave you with three thoughts, not really very original, not original at all, in fact, but the way I would like to see economics done. First of all, I would like to see it abandon the equilibrium method, which seems to be standard in all schools except the Hayekians, I think. If we speak of tendencies, they will be towards cumulative disequilibrium, with equilibrium occasionally achieved because it happens to be midway between the two extremes. What the market does is what enough decision makers think the market is going to do. And I don't think the idea of setting up equilibrium as a benchmark, I should say, strictly speaking, optimum equilibrium as a benchmark, is a useful intellectual technique. I don't see really what good it does. If it's meant to be an ideal system which might be achieved at some point, I mean, I think we're never going to get there. If it's meant to be prescriptive and normative, then people should say that's exactly what it is and shouldn't actually take it as being a way of doing science. Second, to know how an economy is going to behave, you have to know about its history and institutions. That is the huge strength of the institutional school. And that should be a compulsory part of economics teaching. Otherwise, you just don't understand the society in which economies are working, in which they're embedded. And therefore, you don't understand the outcomes, what the outcomes might be of policies you advocate. And my third proposition is that no field of study should be excluded from the study of economic phenomena. No field of study should be excluded, and from the framing of public policy. In other words, you must have in economics courses history, sociology, political theory, literature. Anything relevant to explaining economic behavior should be within the purview of an economist. Now, I'm not saying you should devote equal time to all of these things. It would be a completely unrealistic undertaking. It would require heroic investment in various different things, but you should know something about them. You should have some references to them. You should know. When someone says something in the area of politics or literature, you should have enough knowledge to be able to sort of relate it to some of the core things that you've been studying. And not be completely ignorant and say, look, I've just done this for the last 10 years and I don't know anything about anything else. And that equips me to be an economist. It's just not true. And Keynes had a marvelous passage, which some of you may know, about Alfred Marshall, in which he said, the great economist has to have these qualities, and there are about 7 of them. And they included some of the things I've talked about. Keynes also included mathematics. Absolutely right, but not just mathematics. So, I'd like to end on that point. I hope what I've said hasn't been completely repugnant to post-Keynesians. I haven't accepted the necessary truth of the post-Keynesian revelation. But I do think of the backwater schools, it's by far the most interesting and important one, and important to develop further. Thank you. He's been waiting. He's been waiting for 7 hours. He went back home. He had a sleep. He then thought about it. He then sharpened his weapons. Now he's come back refreshed. He's refrained from wine. He's applied wine on me.
Mainly 2 o'clock.
It's the mainly that worries me.
In the face of such really transcendent presence, that I found that I had very little that I could follow in. But there is something that I want to raise with you. And that I think in the back of the framing of your argument, there is still an acceptance of the predominance of a certain traditional set of institutional structures in economics. That is to say that for you, even though you recognize that nothing is going wrong with any interest or importance, that the dominant forces in economics are the ones who claim to be dominant. And here we are. I don't know, there are perhaps 200 people who are committed to changing the course of intellectual history and are contributing to it in a significant way. And I assure you that if you go to any meeting, any session of the American Economic Association at its annual meetings, you will find a room twice as large as this, full of chairs and half a dozen people. A decrepit institutional thinking, in contrast to what's going on. And I want to suggest that perhaps in other, even more remote corners of the world, perhaps in Quito, or Buenos Aires, or Sao Paulo, or Shanghai, or maybe Moscow, or I can never go to both, that there are even further in the backwater people who are even more free of being dominated by that structure of ideas. And so that we would all do better if we recognize that it's really what's going on here is going to be important. Because the ideas that you articulated, there are 3 of them, I noted them, that we get ourselves free of the notion of long-term equilibrium as the determining trend. Secondly, that we incorporate history and institutions in what we think. And third, that we be inclusive. And you mentioned a number of fields to which I would add biology and physics as a basic framework of the laws of governance there. This is what we're doing. And therefore, it's really, this is, I don't care whether it was a mainstream. This is what's important. So that's really what I have to say. Everything I agree with except that residual notion that the old institutions were still the important ones, even though they are in the process of discrediting themselves. Thanks very
much. I suppose a debating answer might be, do people in this room feel themselves at the heartland of economics, or do they feel marginalized in their own institutions? Yeah, well, okay, I mean, maybe, I hope you are, I really hope you are, but I mean, my impression is that, I mean, and this is one of the things the students were up against, that they feel that the heartland is still dominated by neoclassical economics, and that is located in some institutions. Now, I agree with you, Jamie, very much. I think there are things happening all over the world. But what I think very important things, and they may be associated with the rise of new structures of power globally. China, particularly one thinks about India, Japan, and so on. But historically, economics has been, well, not historically, but for the last 70 or 80 years, let's say since the Second World War, has been an Anglo-American enterprise, and particularly American enterprise. People come here from all over, or have been coming here for all over the world to be trained in economic competencies, and then they're sent back and go into central banks, treasuries, and economics departments in their own countries, having been well trained at MIT, Chicago, Harvard, wherever it might be. And I think that's been the pattern. Now, that pattern may be changing, because at the heart of it isn't changing, but maybe the receptiveness of people around the world to these kinds of things is changing. I'm just thinking that I hope what you say is right, but I'm not sure. Until American power wanes, both soft power and hard power, I'm not sure this pluralist world of economics is actually going to be realized.
On the second point, there's a lot of truth in that. But there's UNAM, we have representatives of UNAM here. They have always provided a counterpoint to Chicago. We have many Brazilians here. Brazil is sort of a bastion of Keynesian economics. So I don't think we should get too Amero-British.
American, really. Britain's out of it.
Well, many of us here, including probably Jamie, will argue that we adopted the British political economy, that the institutionalist tradition was very strong here, and tried to provide an alternative. So that's one. The other one is a very, very minor. Very minor. And I would only make a proposal. Student movement against mainstream. About 2 years before.
Priority
2 years
issue.
before.
Yeah.
No statistics. We had some still here, and Matt is someone who was recommending. Around 2000, we had a postgraduate some still here, in which the students started the movement with the Kansas City memo. Natalia has a good memory. Okay, there we go. Stand on. Come on, Joel.
That's not how it was known. First, when I went into the first And then I invited my friends to come here, and we had our constitutional
What was the memo called? What was the memo called?
Kansas City Manifesto.
Proposal, I think proposal. Canada. I think it's called the Kansas City proposal. I think it was 2001, but it was after.
Well, yeah. Anyway, there's clearly an important issue of priority involved here. But post-autistic sounds French, doesn't it?
I'd like to ask you a question because I'm a always fan of traveler. Many people in the community do and as well as this economics itself. And what I wanted to come back to is your observation about paradigm shifts. And I believe that when paradigm shifts in natural sciences occur, sometimes they will encounter resistance from religious perspective. But when paradigm shifts in the social sciences attempt to occur, they can confront major centers of political and economic. And those centers don't sit anymore than religious powers do. They counter. And I think that perhaps part of the reason why the Keynesian paradigm maybe didn't take hold there for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is, I believe, that, and what's interesting is that in spite of all the attempts to get a more social, if you will, take on economics, like the Financial Times just in the last few days, President editorial, calling for a change in the way in which economics is taught and conceptualized. Brad DeLong's website has a very interesting article about, and it quotes Paul Sanders, how he was a really textbook in which he addresses the role of government, core government, in the economy, the letter writing campaign, and the distortion and how that text moved from universities. Professor Lee has documented this tendency to delegitimize non-mainstream thought and how that occurs in many different ways. And I think that to say that it failed to take hold or that these ideas somehow need to find a way to be more persuasive, I think maybe overlooks a little bit of the challenge that's been faced here. And there could be other examples. So I just want to say that I don't think it's a loss of the ability of ideas to compete. And there's a real recognition.
It's not the lack of ability of ideas to compete, it's lack of ability of ideas to get accepted. Intellectual competition may be powerful, it may be very, very strong, but it doesn't ensure acceptance. What's interesting, I think, is to know why the Keynesian, what supported the victory of, I put victory in inverted commas because it was a final victory, of the Keynesian revolution in the period, let's say 1940 to 70. And I think the answer is actually given by an analysis of the power structure of that day, and particularly in terms of John Kenneth Galbraith's book, The Theory of Countervailing Power. Is that the exact title of it? Yeah, Concept of Countervailing Power. And I think what you have there is the capitalist class has lost some power, the capitalist class has lost some power, and the unions have gained power and the government has gained power. I mean, some of the precipitating events were the Great Depression itself. Anyway, you had some sort of balance of social forces, and because of that balance, certain sets of ideas could be adopted. I mean, that's a very loose way of putting it, but there was some relationship between the ideas that were accepted and the structure of power in the society of that day. Since the 1980s, the unions have been dismantled, the government has certainly lost power, and what's been left is the power of big business as a dominating element in the power structure of the society. And not only just big business, but the financial power and the financial oligarchy. Now, that there is some relationship between those events and the type of economics and economic policy that's accepted. Now, I know correlation isn't a cause. I don't know which exactly leads which, but there's some relationship between the two. And that's just something that history of economic thought has to take account of.
Yeah, maybe we should, be concerned with getting articles in the New York Times, but also in the New York Daily News. I mean, we should not be so highbrow. We should, try to, speak to the people. The Tea Party's speaking to them. And we got some crazy Illuminati stuff out there. And we need to get out. We have more cogent theory if we go to the people. It's not as, not as fancy as the New York Times or the Financial Times. But why do they do it? They don't have to stop teaching you about the people.
New York Times.
That's fine, we'll be Daily News. I say the New York Post, fuck it, let's go to the New York Post. But that's what, the other thing I'm going to say is, I hope that we don't need to have more turbulence. It's pretty bad out there for people, right, that aren't in conferences. It's still bad for them. So we need to organize, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was Schumpeter who said, you should never waste a good crisis. But I think that's not something I subscribe to. No, of course, you not only have to have a good story, but you have to have an effective way of telling the story. And the story is quite counterintuitive in some ways. Take a well-known remark by the current German Chancellor, Angela Merkel. Every housewife knows that you can't spend more than you've got. Every housewife knows that. That's a good story. It's a good story, and it's a story that resonates. Now, you start talking about the fallacy of composition, the paradox of thrift, or even, my spending is your income, and start talking about interdependency. It can be done. There are ways of doing it, but it's not an old wives' tale. You've got to find equivalents of old wives' tale which, relate to academic economics, just as,
That's what we tell them, you need a mom and pop store. That's what we tell them.
Okay.
We're not a mom and pop store.
Yeah, but most people here are mom and pops.
That's right.
Yeah? So that's how they think of their household budgets, government's budget. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm just saying that one's got to tell an effective story and find the means to persuade people of it. It's difficult, it's challenging, and last thing I'd wish would be another mighty crisis to dynamite the old nonsense out of people's heads. Sorry. You come first, and I'll say in a second.
So what's more important? Should we be focusing on winning theoretical battles with other economists, or should we be making a public relations campaign to find very clear and simple ways of changing the paradigm?
Both. It depends on the occasion. When Keynes wrote the general theory, he said, this is addressed to my fellow economists. But at the same time, the whole of the Keynesian revolution was found in his popular writings. They're all there. His commentaries on the slump, his writings in weeklies, his writings in the national newspapers. You can find the whole revolution there. So he was a great persuader. He persuaded on two levels. He persuaded his colleagues by providing them with a sort of theory which they could, without too much difficulty, accept. Without too much damage to their previous beliefs, some damage, but not enough, and then a popular version. And I think the same we should be doing today. I don't believe we have won the theoretical battle, actually. I think there's still a lot of fighting to be done on that front, and we haven't won the battle of persuasion. Why did governments actually intervene in 2008, 2009 to stop the slide into a Great Depression? I think there was some idea behind it, but not much. They just didn't want a repeat of 1929-32. And the people in power knew that if they did nothing, there would be that, and there would be lots of very unpleasant social and political consequences. So they did what was necessary. As soon as they'd done what was necessary, they went back to the old system, the old set of ideas. So, you know, that battle still has to be waged. I know it's difficult. In England, I've been trying to fight austerity for 5 years. I've written, you know, 12 articles in the Financial Times, blah, 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 blah. But actually, the end of the day is, they say, look, we're recovering, we've won, austerity works. There, so that's a quick answer. Yes, over there. Yeah.
I want to question your remarks about the people.
About the what? Sorry.
Behavioral economics.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If anything, I think some people in this room would be critical of the idea that they think it's been accepted by the establishment and the elites as well. And I think also that both the Cameron government and the Obama government have, have people who are leading in this direction, and so it's sort of like, what is it? So, but I want to raise the fact that Keynes himself was very much adamant on the behavioral economics ideas, heuristics, information, well before the development of modern behavioral economics more recently. And this is, I think, an area that I think is going to be more important in the future. You kind of dismissed it, so it's not going to. I think that post-Keynesian economics really should, in fact, recognize that Keynes himself was a father, was before Herbert Simon, the official behavioral economics, and accept this and incorporate it very seriously.
Well, there's a very fruitful potential union between behavioral economics and institutional economics, actually, but it's not actually being explored by the current schools of behavioral economics. That is that within in given institutions, people's psychology acts in this particular way, and I think Keynes's emphasis on the importance of conventions is a very good illustration of that. And conventional behavior is a psychological response to uncertainty within a structure which is specified. And the structure is, he gives a structure. There's stock markets. There are all kinds of institutions. So there is a potential union there. But at the moment, I think it's split. It's split off. The union by the mainstream's insistence on methodological individualism. I stress that, it seems to me, as a cardinal fallacy, which is contrary to Keynes, because Keynes starts with macroeconomics. He starts with it. He doesn't try to derive macroeconomic conclusions from microeconomics. He doesn't say, look, you add up individual decisions and behavioral decisions and you get to a macroeconomic outcome. He says these are the macroeconomic outcome. Now what individual behavior is consistent with this sort of experience? That's how he starts, I think.
Okay, we will continue the discussion informally. Please, let's thank one more time.